Thank you for joining us on today's episode of The Road to Reconstruction. Today's guest is an ENFJ on the Myers-Briggs test. He's a 9 Wing 8 on the Enneagram test. He has an amazing podcast called I Am Not Podcast. Today I interview my good friend Ernesto. Ernesto is such an amazing guy who has such an awesome heart, and I love the way he thinks too. Even while listening back, I started thinking to myself, man, I hope that people don't think that this is an episode where he's just crapping on the church or talking negatively about people. But in all reality, this is Ernesto's story, and I think that it is powerful, and to see how God has transformed his life is the best part about it. One important thing that he teaches me in this podcast as well is that everybody has a story, and it's important to hear it. Sometimes we think that we can't honor the ones that we love by being honest about it, but in reality, that's not true. Honor and honesty should always go hand in hand, and I truly believe that is what Ernesto is doing in this podcast. Again, today's episode is sponsored by Monkeys with a Microphone. They are not paying me at all, so I am sponsoring them until they pay me. So Jack and Johnny, I hope you guys are listening to this. But honestly, guys, Monkeys with a Microphone is a hilarious podcast. Some of my close friends shoot it. I love listening to it, honestly. So go check them out. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. And also, you can turn on the notifications on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Here is my conversation with Ernesto. So yeah, like catch me up to speed on like everything. So it's probably hasn't been really since I remember, like probably the last times I saw you at Metro was like when you preached at Unite, which was amazing, by the way. Like I said, I always knew there was something like special about you, where I'm like, this guy just freaking gets it. Like he's not like everybody else. I don't know. You just really get life, I feel like. So, and you were preaching around that time. So did you go to LifeBridge or something after that, or?
So it's kind of interesting because like what I was doing at the time when I started preaching at Unite Live and whatnot is that I really wanted to be exposed to more teaching styles and preaching styles. So literally like once a month I would always go to Metro, but the 3 other weeks I would go to different churches around, downriver, our county in general.
Yeah.
Just because I thought, it'd be great exposure and just to hear how everyone teaches and, take and learn from everyone.
Wow.
So yeah, I went to LifeBridge. I mean, I went to, oh my word. Yeah, most of the churches in Downriver, I've been to one of them at one point of time.
For sure. Yeah. Did you have like preaching opportunities there too, or were you just kind of like, you just went there and?
So I mostly just went just to go. I mean, randomly, I don't even remember the radio station, but I got hooked up with talking on the radio at one point, and kind of preaching on there. But for the most part, it was just going to different churches.
Yeah. Wow.
Just because I'd been at Metro since 6th grade. So, I mean, that's all I basically knew faith-wise.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. And then when did you go to like another church? Was there a time that you like stopped going to Metro and just went to one of those churches, or like how did that play out?
Yeah. So I was going to Metro pretty consistently until I was like 19. And it just kind of came down to like my work schedule because I was working like 3 jobs and going to college. So I was I'm always dead inside, but it's okay. I'll go to Unite though, so it's all good.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I was preaching on and off at Unite and Alive and whatnot, and getting exposure to those different churches and just exposure in college and whatnot to a lot of different people and ideals. It didn't rock my Christian faith. It didn't. But I just started seeing a lot of what I would consider kind of like toxic mentalities at Metro. And I just naturally started distancing myself a little bit, but it was kind of hard because like I was involved in, Unite and everything,
Yeah.
and youth ministry, volunteering, preaching. And I mean, I was at Pastor Jay's house like every other weekend with Zach and them. Um, and so I always hate saying like, oh, I was part of the inner circle. I mean, I kind of was.
You were.
That's just the station I was in.
Yeah.
And as I started actually paying attention to more of these nuances, I realized like, oh, there's a lot of things I'm actually not okay with, but I just didn't really make a fuss about it because this is all I know.
Yeah.
Like, this is the only church I've really felt at home with. I mean, heck, almost all my friends are just Metro people.
Yeah. Kind of scared to stir the pot a little bit.
Right. And sure enough, I was just sitting there, and it's kind of funny because there's a running joke that with my wife that she's the reason I left Metro. Like that's a huge like conspiracy theory that a lot of people I used to talk to. They're like,
Okay. Yeah.
oh yeah, Jamie ruined it all. Because I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I met her back in Fuel,
Mm-hmm.
like sixth grade, and we didn't really date until after college years and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But I just started struggling in my faith and just what I knew as love and what I knew as productive and what the Bible said versus some of the teachings and mentalities that I knew some of the leaders had there. And so I just kind of wrestled with that in silence. And my wife was the one that was like, hey, that was not cool, like what they talked about or what happened in this meeting. Because she would come into meetings with me. And I'm like, yeah, but, it's just kind of how it is. And, they're more further ahead. We got to respect our elders, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I mean, maybe you're okay with that, but that's not okay. And she'd like really
Yeah.
push at me and just be like, you need to really think for yourself, respect yourself, love yourself. And I mean, she's just my inspiration. She really is.
Yeah.
But as time progressed, I started stirring the pot and I stopped being allowed to go to leadership meetings and Unite and Alive.
Wow.
Just because there's a lot of people that were not okay with some of the things I was saying. And it wasn't disrespectful. I was just like, hey, I know we're a Christian church and everything, but I think we're a little too Christian. Like, I would never invite some of my secular friends, which I even hate saying the word secular.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, like, oh yeah, we're going to do a deep study in Hebrew or whatever, which was really cool. But I mean, you take a normal college student that's probably hungover, they're not going to want to sit down and study Hebrew. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, time and place for everything. But anyway, so I was just thinking like, we need to focus more on like the outreach for those that aren't familiar or a friend to the church. Because those are exactly who Jesus would want us to love on. And, just one thing led to another. And eventually, yeah, I ended up in a bad spot with a lot of influential people there. And I just kind of stopped going. And I went to Why Not Family Church for a while with my girlfriend, now wife, and her family. So that was great. And I started distancing myself from some people in Metro. Although they're just very deeply invested in my family, but not like in a great way.
Yeah.
But I mean, I stand by it, and it breaks my heart because like I grew up with these people and I loved them dearly. But when you see people in leadership, spiritual leadership, and they act in these certain ways, it's just heartbreaking because if this is happening to me, who else is it happening to? And
Absolutely.
like you said earlier, like you can throw a stick anywhere in downriver and you'll hit a few people that have been affected by Metro.
Yeah.
And, I'm definitely not about like name calling or like, trashing on people. But at the same time, like I'm just here to let people know like, hey, whether it be Metro, whether it be another church or whatever, like, that's not faith.
Yeah.
Jesus hasn't betrayed you. Jesus didn't abuse you. Just someone that is claiming to follow Jesus, or someone that is a Christian, they failed you.
Absolutely.
But for me, when you're hurt and you're broken and you're just, everything you believed in is being torn apart, it doesn't matter. because at the end of the day, you feel like, well, regardless if it's a Christian or Jesus himself, it's all the same.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to separate those two and just realize, like, no, Jesus didn't fail me. He never did. He can't fail me.
Yeah. Amen.
And it was like a light bulb moment, like, okay, I need to figure out what my faith is now, because I had to unlearn a lot of concepts I learned there. And I started relying on my Bible more faithfully, but looking at it with a different perspective. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I'm just, I like to call it deconstructing, but it's not so much deconstructing so I become an agnostic or atheist or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that for those that are on that journey. But for me, I just take it that I'm deconstructing all the toxic and abusive dogma that I was taught growing up.
Yeah.
And getting back to the roots of Christianity, like my actual faith, not religion, not fundamentalist, whatever. And yeah, it's grassroots.
Yeah.
And once you get rid of all that noise, you remember who your first love is. It's like, okay, no, this is who Jesus is. I forgot about you.
Yeah.
I just saw who you were through this lens, and it's not who you are.
Yeah. Dude, that's so good. I love so much of everything that you just said. And a few things that stick out to me first is like, it is super hard, because even I've acknowledged that in myself of like, dude, I'm the reason some people never want to come to church again. And that's a hard pill to swallow, whether if it's my former wife, whether if it's a friend of mine that I used to hang out, whether if it's, a family member, whoever it is, like that's a really tough pill to swallow. And trying to, look back at that time, those times, and just accept humility and say, hey, maybe I wasn't right in doing this or that, or where did I go wrong? And trying to, look at the Bible with a different perspective. And you and I had that small conversation even on Facebook when we were planning this whole thing of the idea of detangling, and that, that's, I love that you're on here so much, because, the whole point is to reconstruct. And I love that word of detangling, where it's like, you've grown up learning so many different things. And I love how you put it. It's almost like a bunch of Christmas lights that you can't just rip out because you're going to break the light bulbs or something, but you have to like slowly detangle it. So, and I've come to that moment too a couple of years ago in my life. Thankfully, it didn't rock my faith, but it did encourage me to kind of pick apart of like, man, I was taught this by the church or a Christian or something, and like that's pretty messed up. And this doesn't bring fruit to my life at all. And it's because of these certain things that people look at the church and say, yeah, I don't want anything to do with you or the church or anything anymore. And it's like, dang, bro, like I have to realize that I've been the problem here in some areas, and how do I fix that? So yeah, I think that's a part of reconstructing, detangling, everything in between, so yeah, it is. And I hope for the best for everybody listening. Like, I hope that they don't have to, toss out the baby with the bathwater and like, not be a Christian at all again. But it's like, man, like realize that, Jesus is real. He's still alive and moving, and he's not the one that hurt you. And these people did because of their own sin or their own selfishness or motives or whatever it is.
Right. And I can definitely relate to the whole like cringing, remembering things like,
Yeah.
because typically you're like, oh, I remember when I was 14, that was awful. I'm sorry to anyone who knew me.
Yeah.
But same thing with me. It's like, I remember that Christian Ernesto, and I was like so high and mighty, and oh, I have my Bible and I'm going to go study for 6 hours. How many hours did you study? Like, and I just cringe at the way I would talk to some of my friends from high school. I mean, I would never hate on them, but it's still, I'm just like, yeah, no, that's not Jesus. That's whatever that religious fanatic Ernesto was.
Yeah.
So yeah, but something I've had to learn, and it hit me so hard, was you can't grow until you forgive yourself, because
Mm.
if you don't forgive yourself, you won't feel worthy of growing.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's true. Why would I grow if I don't think I'm worth it?
Mm.
And it's hard because, like, there's conversations that you just sit there and you're like, I could have just said a million different things, or I could have just been quiet and it would have been better.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, for anyone listening, like, you got to forgive yourself because that's the only way forward.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, forgiving whoever did anything to you, like, yeah, that's part of the journey. But if you don't start with forgiving yourself, you're not letting yourself even start the race.
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, that's kind of what hit me, and it started my journey. And okay, it's not let's give Christianity another try. It's let me find out what real Christianity actually is.
Yeah. Wow. Do you feel like one of the biggest things of forgiving yourself was kind of like how you said, like this 14-year-old, how you acted, or do you feel like it was something else that you had to forgive yourself from?
So I had to give myself context, be like, all right, so why did I do these things? Like, okay, so this is the only faith that I had. These are the principles I was given. And yeah, I was a stupid teenager and whatever. And so, yeah, I wasn't really thinking half the time. And even saying half the time's gracious. But it's just taking the first step and just saying, like, look, yeah, I could have done that better. I could have, you can say that about anything in life. But just once you come to the realization that, you know what, you made a mistake, as long as you own it and accept that, okay, that was bad,
Yeah.
but I can learn from that. If you can learn from your mistakes, you're golden.
Yeah.
And that kind of comes with faith as well. I mean, Jesus is all about revival. Because, like, and I know this is kind of a side tangent, but, like, it's not so much my favorite verse, but one of my favorite stories is, like, I think it was Ezra. Forgive me, it's been a minute. But when he was talking about these dry, sun-bleached bones in this desolate desert, and there's no hope for those bones to come to life. Like, if someone's dying, there's hope that they'll make it through. I mean, but if you're these old bones, like, they're not coming back. But God said otherwise. Like, he's like, no, that's what exists in your reality, but I'm not limited to your reality. And he brought those bones back to life. And it's just, I find that so comforting, because even if my reality was negative or was awful or hopeless, or someone's reality out there is just, there's just nothing there. Well, yeah, that's the reality you're stuck in. That's the amazing thing about God, is that he's not limited by your little reality. Now, that doesn't mean I'm diminishing your pain or suffering or situation. But when you think of it from the perspective of God, it's like, no, like, he's not limited whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so you just got to accept the fact that, yeah, that was bad, but I can learn from it. I can improve on that. And luckily, my God is someone that's all about redemption, all about new futures.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I find is the biggest crutch for so many pastors is, like, and it's really a double-edged sword, because they are so, like, into everything they say and believing that that is the 1000% truth. And I get it. Like, we should have something steady to stand on. Like, if we were preaching the gospel and we were doubtful about it, like, that's probably not so great, because, like, we want to be just so secure in everything that we say. And I think that the part where they get it wrong is, like, some of, like, those just, like, type A personality type of guys are just so, like, dead set that everything they believe is true about the Bible, but that also means that everything they've ever done or said is correct. and every political belief they have is 1000% correct. And it's like, all right, dude, this is where we're getting into like the prideful territory, because like there's no more humility. You think that everything you do, think, say, and whatever it is 100% correct. And that's where there's like that lack of humility. And that's where really they end up shooting themselves in the foot,
Right. It's when they become unapproachable, and that there's no way I can be imperfect, because I believe in having a strong conviction in your belief.
Yep.
But that's the thing. It's a conviction in your belief, not yourself.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I am all about self-empowerment and you got this. Like, no, I totally believe in that. But you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But yeah, once you get to that point where you're just you're an influence and you're in a position of leadership, and then you think you can't make a mistake, that's dangerous territory. And also, side note, everyone's entitled to their political opinions. But if your church during a sermon starts talking about politics, that's not a redemption moment. That's a get out moment.
Yeah. It's a self-righteous moment.
That's a red flag. That's go get out.
Yeah. Dude, and we've talked about this. I love how, I don't ever want to feel like I'm like just talking to myself or in relationship with myself. Like, I love how you're a 9 on the Enneagram as well, where, you're a peacemaker. You're very open-minded to these things. You're all about perspective and stuff. And that's what I'm always like yearning to do, is to really see just like all the perspectives and to be like, hey, you know what? Maybe I am wrong about some of these things, and I have nothing. Let me say this. Let me make a disclaimer. I have nothing against the conservative Republican political party. However, most of those people are Christians, and the way that they go about it is not Christ-like at all, which I have a problem with. So yeah, that's like, it's certain idealistics like that where I'm like, oh dude, you are just missing the point so bad. And yeah, bro, you're just like not like, you're not like reflecting the gospel or love or anything, or the name of Jesus at all. So yeah, that's when I have a problem with it.
No, I totally agree, because I don't know who said it, but I heard it once, that once your principles take the place of love, or they're more important than love, then you have the wrong principles.
Ooh, let's go, Ernesto. It's freaking good. Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, I get it. I mean, it's just, it's tempting to be like, oh, well, I know the right answer, and I'm going to beat you down with it until you accept it.
Yeah. I know.
But yeah, no, that's hard. And about the Enneagram. Yeah. And it's interesting because like, I've taken this, throughout time, just because I work a fun big boy corporate job.
Oh yeah.
And we have to do that every once in a while. And it's
nice.
Interesting over time, because like mine has changed, where I'm still 9, but there's such little subtleties that have changed. And we're like, now one of the subcategories I have is like teacher.
Oh,
where
interesting.
it's like, and this is something I really struggled with as fanatical Ernesto, I like to call him, where like I was like, oh, I'm gonna go save this person, I'm gonna go help them, I'm gonna go like be the hero, you know, oh, dun, 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 here's my Bible, you know. But now it's more of a no, growth is all about equipping people for what they need, because like, I understand that sometimes you gotta get into the mud with someone and get them out. I mean, like, for example, like depression. I mean, depression's a monster. It takes a village. You can't just be like, hey, here's some self-help books. All right, see you at church.
Hey, try not being sad.
Right. And don't forget to vote. But no, I just truly believe the only way to grow as Christians is like, we hold each other accountable and we help each other out. But if we don't equip each other with the resources needed, we're just helping them out. We're not actually helping them grow and flourish into the person they can be. So yeah, it's like, it's not about giving answers. It's about equipping people. And yeah, that was definitely a struggle for me, because I just want to help people, because I know what's right and they don't. Let me go help them.
Dude, and part of our conversation earlier about having the podcast, like about me having my podcast, you having yours, is like, I don't think that this podcast is the cure to anybody. You know, like if somebody gets closer to Jesus, obviously that is a goal. You know, that is the mission. I hope that I could help somehow, shape or form. But at the same time, I don't think like, oh, this podcast right here, when people are listening to it, it's gonna like cure humanity. Like, you know, like I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, and they get super disappointed too, because it's like, listen, man, like you could only lead a horse to water. You can't force them to drink. And like, as much as we do want to help, we have to realize what is actually helpful and what is not.
Absolutely. And now that I know it's not the cure, I am not subscribing. So no one subscribe because it's not the cure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I admire when you're telling me about your podcast and how it's about, rebuilding your faith or just finding out what your faith actually is. Like, I just found that wonderful because, like, my podcast isn't Christian centric specifically. It's mostly just about people's journeys out of abusive or toxic relationships and how they've been able to grow in life. Mm-hmm. I do love your podcast just because it just brings to light, like, okay, like, for example, like, let's just say someone were to follow like my podcast, like, oh yeah, like I did go through that stuff. And then they find out your podcast and maybe that helps them into some kind of faith, It's like, okay, that's the steps that's awesome.
Yep.
Regardless, like, you just telling me about your podcast, I was so excited because it's so much hope.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of hope out there. We need more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I deeply appreciate that. Try not to talk about my podcast anymore, but let's talk about your podcast a little bit. So I listened to yours twice now, and I really just wanted to like soak in everything you're saying because you have a powerful message. And like I said, if anybody is listening, go check it out, the I Am Not podcast, because your story is incredible. And I know this is going to be like a slippery slope a little bit talking about it, but I believe that honor and honesty should always be like married to each other. I think a lot of times when people feel like they're honest about other people, the only way they could do that is by dishonoring them, or the other way around, where they honor someone so much that they feel like they can't even be honest about it. So, in your podcast, you talk about your father, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit, if that's okay.
Of course.
Because, man, that just broke my heart. And, like, I think it's just so crazy because, like, there's some keywords that you say that, like, really just, like, hit me in the heart of, like, oh, my gosh, dude, I can't imagine going through that. And especially when you're talking about how you started opening up a little bit about your testimony and the abuse that you suffered from your father, and you were kind of told by elders and, different people in the back room of like, hey, like you're going to really ruin a great guy's reputation. And you're like, what? Like, and, being gaslighted is such a hurtful thing. Whether somebody, and I don't think anybody tries to intentionally gaslight you, but most of the time it's intentional or, unintentional. So like, yeah, like it's hard because I've even met your dad a couple times, and the few times I met him, I'm like, oh, this guy's awesome. He's on the security team, super charming, charismatic guy, like outgoing, like this guy's awesome. Like, Ernesto has a great dad. And then hearing all that stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, that really happened. So it's like, like I have to question of like myself almost of like, oh my gosh, like what is like reality here, whatever it is. So yeah, I guess like, if you could share a little bit about that time in your life and kind of where you are now, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, first things first, I have to say is thank you. Thank you for listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just happy I got one view, and now there's more than one view. So that's great.
Dude, everybody needs to go listen to it, man. It's incredible. And healing is so important. And I love that you shared your story like that.
Yeah. And the thing about my dad is like, and I'll say it out front, he is one of the most charismatic, like people I've ever met in my life. Like,
Yeah.
he's a smart dude.
Mm.
So yeah, no, like, I don't blame anyone that was ever like, oh, he's a great guy. Because, and this is one of the things I said on the podcast, is that what's really hard about a domestic abuse situation is that, you know, they tend to be real charming when they need to be.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's awful all the time. Like, there's plenty of good memories
Oh,
I've
for
had
sure.
with him,
Yeah.
but like they would be sprinkled in the middle of a horrible storm of life of
Yeah.
just living in fear and anxiety. And it's like, yeah, his position in Metro slowly grew as he got, you know, closer to, you know, people in leadership and whatnot. And it was a ploy just to have more influence on my life, more control, basically. And it was just, it was, you know, it's kind of interesting because, like, I got involved with my group of guys and whatever. And, you know, like, we formed beautiful friendships and whatnot. But he was always like that force in the background where it's like, hey, you go have fun where I can see you, you know. And of course, no one knew because, I mean, domestic abuse is really taboo, even today's age. And so, yeah, it was very difficult just because, like, I couldn't really share it. And yeah, like you said, eventually they started asking me, so I got more involved in ministry, like, hey, why don't you share your story? And so I would share like a PG-13 version, and it'd be like, actually, on second thought, like,
Yeah.
we have him set up for a few leadership positions, so if you could like not say that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, no, I kind of want to share that now that you put that on.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, so let's have some backroom meetings real quick. I'm like, all right, we're gonna have some meetings. Okay, that's cool. And no, sure enough, yeah, like the gaslighting and just, are you sure you remember that right? Or no, you probably misinterpreted it. Or like, there's just so many patterns. And it's like, it's a group of men yelling at this like 13-year-old in the back of a church for like an hour or two. And then at the end of it, they're like, all right, so you're going to apologize to your dad. And you're just like, I apologize. I made that up. Like, and you're just like,
Oh man.
I just want to go home and do my homework and go to sleep. I'm just done. So yeah, I apologize. I made it up. I'm good.
Oh, dude.
And so, like, it was just like this cognitive dissonance because, you know, all of this stuff is going on in the background with all these leaders that everyone looks up to and respects. But then the next day you're just hanging out with all your friends and whatnot, and you're like, I don't even want to think about what happened last night. I'm not going to bring it up, and I'm not going to stir the boat because I'm going to be the crazy one. Because, like, how is it that I'm the crazy one in the middle of like 50 people that have had a great experience with these people?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was very difficult, and it happened on and off for years, to be honest. So it was just, it was not a good time. I don't recommend it. Like 2 out of 5 stars.
Yeah. Dude, if I could just like share really quick too, man, like,
Of course.
oh man, there's like a time in my adult life where I'm still kind of healing from it, but it felt like that. Like I like sat down, I leave there feeling like humiliated and shamed and condemned and all this stuff. And I leave being like, oh, you know what? I was in like the wrong 100%. Like I should have never even like tried speaking up about anything. And then it's like I start to get a backbone a little bit because I start to think about it. And I think what's most helpful is hearing other people's voices. Like when you tell the story to so many people and you're not even trying to like sway it as like, this person's awful. Like, yeah, this is what happened. And like, yeah, I was wrong. And when every single person's reaction is like, dude, that's messed up. You shouldn't like listen to that. And it's like, oh, well, what do you mean? No, they were just trying to help. And they're like, no, that's like really jacked up what they said and how they made you feel. And I'm like, well, no, they had good intentions, you know? And then I start trying to stick up for them. And it's not until you really get that backbone of like, you know what? No, like this wasn't okay. And of course, when you stand up, that's when everybody starts having a problem with it. And oh, dude, there is nothing more hurtful than that. And like, yeah, I think being gaslighted is just such a painful thing to deal with. So yeah, man, I know that yours is like way worse, but I hope that you could like see that I've been through at least a little bit of that as well, you know. So yeah, man, I'm right there with you. I know how that feels.
Yeah, and just to say, suffering is suffering.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any like, oh, mine's worse than yours, so I'm ha.
Yeah.
No, so like I'm so sorry to hear
Yeah,
that you've
thanks,
gone
man.
through that. And we talked about that a little bit on the side,
Yeah.
and it's just like situations like that where like all I remember, knowing you, because like we weren't like super close friends, we were like acquaintances, but I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, it's Alec. Like everyone loves Alec. He's like life of the party. He's got his own band. Like he's like a rock star. Like he's so cool. I'm not gonna talk to him because he's like really cool, and I don't think, like I was always actually super intimidated by you.
Really?
And
Interesting.
it's so funny because I met you because of Jordan Beck.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, like this is Alec. I'm like, oh yeah, Alec's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna talk to him because he's really cool. So
Listen, I'm just glad. I'm glad you have a positive view on me from
Yeah.
back then, because I was an a-hole back then, man. And like, so I'm glad you saw the best of me. But yeah, no, I wish that we would have gotten so much closer, man. Because I always like I remember like again hearing you preach the first time. I was like, dude, this guy freaking has it, man. And like I felt like intimidated of like, man, this guy is like, knows his stuff. And yeah. So yeah, funny how that works out.
right. And
Did you know a Little Caesars Hot and Ready pizza is only $5? And if you have a gluten allergy like me, you aren't able to buy that pizza anyways, so you could put that $5 towards our Patreon. That's right, everybody. For only $5 a month, you can get extended cuts and early access to all of these podcasts. For everybody who has subscribed to the Patreon, they have already gotten to see this episode last week, which is a part of the early access benefit. So go check out our Patreon. Thank you, and back to the episode.
yeah, and so like continuing on with my time there, it's just like, eventually, the leadership started noticing like, hey, you might actually have a knack for public speaking. Like, we should like lean into that. And
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, they did give me some great resources and coachings and whatnot on how to speak to the public, and kind of how I talked in the podcast, though. A lot of it also came down to, back then, I forgot the phrase they had, but I'm just going to call it as it is, emotional manipulation. Like, okay, there is something with the church about how like, and they're like, just watch any mega church sermon.
Yeah.
There's always like these super emotional points being made at the the highest point of worship songs and everything. And
the
you're
pad
like,
starts playing. Yeah.
yeah. And then, like sorry. Yeah, I'm just thinking like the magical synth, like,
Yep. Yeah.
it's like, if you have a moment to talk to Jesus, do
Yeah.
it now, whatever. And so they started really leaning into that. They're like, learn how to read a crowd, and like when you can get them vulnerable, that's when you like strike. And I was always like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't want to strike at someone. And I remember they're like, no, it's not like a strike, but like that's when you strike verbally.
Yeah.
And it's like, because that's when their walls are down. That's when they're more willing to accept Christ. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. I don't know if someone should be like that vulnerable and then accept a belief.
Yeah. Because it's almost like you pretty much are selling them something that's counterfeit, because they're not feeling the Holy Spirit. They're just feeling this like kind of what you're saying, like this emotional manipulation. And I'm not saying all preaching is, emotional manipulation, but if that's like their tactic, it's kind of like, oh, like, you got to wait to get them in the right spot, and boom, and now they're a Christ follower, and now they're going to start tithing to our church or whatever, like, it's like that. I could definitely see how that could be like counterfeit, because they're not experiencing the Holy Spirit. They're encountering something that was manufactured in a sense.
Right. And like you said, like I am not discrediting any preacher that does a style like that. I mean, because like, emotions are a God-given gift, and like emotions are powerful, and they're meant to tell us different things about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with feeling emotional during worship for one reason or another. And there's nothing wrong for a speaker or pastor to speak to that hurt or whatever's going on. It was just the intent behind it in my context.
For sure. Yeah.
And so, I mean, and I truly enjoyed speaking, and because I really was like, no, like I can get that one person. And that was always the thing, like always get that one person. There's one person here that can get this message. And like, yeah, I was like a spitfire for a while. And like, I was preaching at a few different churches and whatnot. And as time grew and, situations worsened with me in leadership, and I grew more of a backbone, I started feeling really disillusioned to the fact that I think like the last two sermons I ever had at Unite, like I said it and I did it. I went through the motions, and I remember walking off the stage and I would just weep. I would just cry. And it's so funny because I remember, well, not funny, but like whatever. Whether I don't even remember who it was, but someone's like, "Oh my God, like he's so overcome with the Spirit, he's crying and whatnot."
Man.
And I'm like, "Yep, that's what it is." And on the inside, I'm like, "No, I'm crying because I don't believe any of this." And like I know that I am following a formula, and everyone's gonna congratulate me, and I just gotta put this nice smile when I feel like a counterfeit Christian right now. And yeah, people be like, yeah, he gets really into the sermons. I'm like, no, I was dying on the inside, but I was just doing it. And eventually I just stopped. I just, and my excuse was, oh, I'm getting busy with college and whatnot. And,
Man.
But I mean, that was hard because I was like, I am lying to everyone. But people respond. So I'm like, okay, whatever. No one's seen my lie or deception. And
Dang, dude. That's hard. That is like, sometimes to me, I see a lot of the churches and I see it's ran by a lot of like, the achievers, and like their main focus is like success. So in their eyes, it doesn't matter if you felt it or not, because like if, other people felt it, like that's all that matters. And maybe, I don't know, I don't even want to give like a saying that might be true at all, but it's just like, because I get it, there's probably a lot of pastors that just aren't feeling it some days, but yeah, when you don't even like believe what you're saying, then there's a problem, and you're gonna get burnt out really quick because you're like giving from something that isn't there.
Right. And yeah, like you said, like there's a difference between not feeling it. I mean, like I don't feel like going to work, but I go to work,
Discipline. Pure discipline. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's just when you are at a point where your faith is not there, like who are you speaking for?
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it helped out some people, and that is the grace of God intervening in the middle of all that, somehow, despite that mess, it helped people out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, because I never really developed like, oh, I'm this amazing guy. Like, oh, I am the Moses of Metro.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I am just, I'm just someone speaking what I've read, what I've heard, what I've understood. And so like, it's weird because like I always wanted to go up on that stage and just apologize and be like, hey, like I love you guys. And because of that, like I'm done.
Dang.
But, of course that just add drama, gasoline to the fire.
Yeah. Dude, that's the thing though. I don't think we have enough of that though. I remember saying to somebody before, I was like, I don't know, this is like even weird to say, but like, I don't know, let's say like some scandalous thing came out about me. Not saying I'd want that to happen by any means, but if it did, and I got the opportunity to repent publicly, I think that's a powerful thing, man. And I remember somebody being like, oh, what? You would want that? And I was like, well, again, not that I'd want it, but like there'd be a really amazing opportunity there. And I think when somebody can admit publicly that they failed, I think that's huge, man. I think there's a lot of grace in that. I think there's a lot of accountability, a lot of glory. Like, yeah, I think that's something that is definitely not there anymore too, And I remember hearing before somebody talking about like, if giving a testimony was like Alcohol Anonymous, there'd be so many more people in the church, because like every testimony you hear is like, oh, I was in this part, here, but I'm in this part now. God did everything. There's not much left to do. Like, God already did the big thing, instead of getting on a stage and saying like, hey, this is where I am right now. I am struggling. I don't know if I'm going to make it out alive. Like, please pray for me. Like, I think their testimonies would change drastically if more people did that type of stuff,
Oh yeah, definitely. And to add on to the Alcoholics Anonymous that you brought up, not that I've been in it,
Yeah.
but at Metro there is a group called Renew, and I gotta say, like, I think one of the main reasons my faith survived my whole ordeal was because of Renew.
Yeah.
Because I got to go a lot, because my mom would be one of the main leaders there, and eventually I actually started attending, and then I got to see a glimpse of what I would consider true beauty and faith.
Wow.
Because I would see these people that they're in the worst of the worst points of their life, and they are reaching out. No, like, they're not expecting God to fix it. They're not expecting God to, my life's going to be filled with prosperity or anything. It's like, no, God's going to get me to the next morning.
Wow.
And it was such a raw faith and belief in the power of transformation that was like, this is what I'm craving. I don't know when I've seen faith this raw and childlike.
Wow.
And, just seeing these people, I mean, like, that childlike wonder where it's like, yeah, what can God do today? Like, and it's just, they are always curious, always digging, always seeking. And, when they would fail or fall, like, yeah, it's hard, but then they'd come back and be like, okay, it's okay. God's got me. I woke up today, so that means I have another chance.
Wow.
And I was just like astonished, because I'm like, yeah, here is a group where, I don't know why, but a lot of people did not like Renew or have great comments about it. But I was like, I swear, this is like what the four gospels are about. Wasn't Jesus with a table of what was considered the worst of the worst or whatever?
Yeah.
I'm like, but these are the closest people to Christ that I've met.
Yeah.
So I was just astonished at
Dude.
the simplicity and power of their faith.
Yeah. Dude, that's amazing. Yeah, dude, the Hotchbergs are freaking awesome, man.
Yeah.
So when was this, like, kind of like chronologically, if like you could like break it down for me, like everything, so I could kind of get like a better picture of everything?
Let's see. So 2017, I started butting heads with a lot of people just because I was like, I don't know, I was just asking questions that were not really liked, I guess. I don't know. And I just started developing a backbone, and I started saying no to people more. And it's amazing how many people will get offended when you say no.
Oh, trust me, I know.
Yeah, and you're like, no, I actually need to make time for myself or this or that. And that's when people get problems with you.
Yep. Yeah. Trust me, man. I know no is my favorite word, and I offend too many people with it. And because I get it, I could go a little too far sometimes, and my wife has to really keep me in check about it. But yeah, no, if she wasn't around, I'd be saying no to everybody, like, all the time. So
No, I get that. I get that so much. So it's about 4 years ago is when I ended up cutting out a lot of people.
Yeah.
And just saying like, nope, I'm done. I'm not dealing with this anymore. Like, and like, it's just like during this whole time too, and there's not a specific time for this part. But I developed a backbone with my dad, and like I talked with my podcast, I was like, at one point I was like, no, that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
You're not going to hurt my mom. You're not going to hurt me.
Wow.
Like you're done.
Yeah.
And, so like that was super decisive and divisive and whatnot. But it really inspired me to be like, no, you know what? I do deserve to be happy. I do deserve to have some respect. And, that kind of bled into my time at the church there. And, by the time I was 21, literally it was my wedding day in August. And I was like, a lot of stuff went down, a lot of disrespect, a lot of threats were made. And I was like, that's it. Yeah. You cannot disrespect my wife. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, not that she can't handle herself.
Yeah.
No, like she can handle herself.
Yeah.
But like, no, that's it. And so, yeah, 21, I cut most of my ties. And what is amazing is the silence that follows. Because, I mean, yeah, you would have your group of haters and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I have friends that I grew up with from Fuel all the way up till I was 21. They've never said a word to me since.
Wow.
And I was just like, nothing?
Yeah.
I was like, we spend like 15 years together and then nothing? Which, I mean, yeah, that hurt for a while. But you know what? I've forgiven them.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not blameless in everything, so I've
sure.
forgiven myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the end of the day, it's like, you know what? It works out because I have my wife, I have my 2 beautiful daughters, and I have, well, me.
Yeah.
And we are starting a new chapter, a healthy chapter, an imperfect chapter.
Yeah.
Without all that abuse, without all that indoctrination. And I could not have anything better for my family than that.
Wow.
So, yeah, the timeline's a little messy because there's a good chunk of stuff going on.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's about the approximate timeline. And what kind of resurged the feelings for starting my podcast was actually like this year. Where, you know, I would never speak out against Metro or anyone because, I mean, there's even people that I work with that are in positions of authority that it wouldn't go well for me.
Yeah.
But then I would just start seeing a lot of like Facebook comments from people that have been like excommunicated or have left.
Yep.
And then you see like they'll put something innocent about like their lack of faith or their journey or whatever. And then you see the attack.
Oh, dude.
The storm of people attacking viciously.
Yeah.
These people that are struggling in faith or in life or whatever, or even if they're agnostic or whatever. And it's like, do you guys not see what you're doing?
Oh, yeah.
Like, Jesus would flip your tables right now.
Absolutely.
Like, he would throw your little MacBook out the window. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just like, this is insane. We don't have freedom of speech to talk about our past. Now, I mean, everyone is free to disagree with anything.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah.
I regardless of what side, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then I just started talking to a few people on the side, like, hey, how you doing? Like, what happened with you and, you know, Metro? What happened with you and whatever? And you just hear the same horrible stories over and over again. Not to say that there aren't some amazing, beautiful people there. There really are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, it's I'm not saying it's all evil or anything.
Yeah.
It's just, it's run by humans that make mistakes, and some are willingly malicious decisions. And it just breaks my heart. Like, literally, I would be like crying just hearing these stories from these people. And it's like, no wonder you left. No wonder you are running away from faith.
Yeah.
I ran away, not from faith, but just from churches in general.
Yeah.
And so after that, like, I kept going back and forth. I'm like, Jamie, you know, my wife, I don't know if I'm going to do this podcast because I do not want to get in that storm of being yelled at and whatnot.
Yeah.
But then, like, I had a dream, and basically it was kind of creepy, I'm not gonna lie, but like, I was looking in the mirror and I looked at myself, like my reflection looked at me, and it said, you know, every day that you don't share someone's voice, like, they might not be able to share it the next day or whatever. Or, and it's just like this like scary warning where it's like, yeah, I have the opportunity to create a podcast where people can share their voices, because I don't really want to share my story too much, because I want others to have a way to communicate what they've gone through, and to create a safe space for healing and growth. And maybe they haven't found a resolution yet. That's fine.
Yeah.
Getting it out there is still a huge part of it. But for the people that have been able to make it through to the other side, that goes to show, like, yeah, it does get better. You know, like, this church or whatever you went through is not the end all there is another side to life where you deserve to be happy and to have joy and to have freedom and peace of mind. And so I was like, you know what? If I do get any hate for it, it just kind of proves my point.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I'm approaching it, not in spite of anything. And the funny thing is that the name of the podcast, I Am Not Podcast, has a few different reasons. One is I am not, as in I am not whatever those people labeled me as or stated I was.
Yeah.
But also because I always found it super prideful when people would say like, oh, I am this church or I am this church. And like, I understood the concept.
Yeah.
But then you just see how arrogant, how arrogance thrives in those kind of places.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've seen that in a lot of different churches. And it's like this issue with American Christianity, I feel, where it's like we have this really nice version of Christianity that's really religious, it's really comfortable, but it's also really comfortable in bashing people down.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Oh, dude. Dang it, man. There's like, you remind me of myself a little bit. And like, when you were saying that, like, I know I'm going to get crap for this because that was my thing too. I was like, man, I know I'm going to stir the pot so much. And sometimes I want to stir the pot way more than is necessary.
Yeah.
But
throw the pot.
yeah. Like, oh man, it's just like, how do you grow when you don't have these conversations, you know? And like, I'm trying to find that balance right now where like, I've realized that I am the type of person that says the thing that nobody else really wants to say.
Right.
And I get in trouble for it. And I'm trying to do it now in a loving way.
Yeah.
And still sharing the things that nobody wants to talk about or that nobody, says. So, yeah, I love that so much.
Absolutely. And that's one thing I did want to make sure everyone knew about my podcast is that it's coming out of a place of love.
Yeah.
I am not demonizing anyone. I am not condemning anyone.
Yep.
Because if God doesn't condemn me for all that I do,
Yeah.
I can't do that to anyone either.
Amen.
Now, I can definitely set up clear boundaries to keep myself safe and whatnot, but I will never condemn anyone.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I know a lot of feelings are going to be stirred when we do the things that we're doing.
Yeah.
But it comes from a place of love because, I mean, we want to grow.
Yeah.
We want everyone to heal, come closer to faith or wherever their journey takes them to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just, I love that we're able to come from a place of love and not so much burn it all down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, I mean, had you talked to me like 2 years ago, I'd been like, oh yeah, burn it down.
Yeah.
Burn it all down.
Yep. Oh man, it's so freaking good. And yes, I think when you say it comes out of love, what I think in my head is like, and I'm sure there might be people from Metro listening, that, might get offended, might get hurt. And, at least my motive right now is like, even like you sharing it or me sharing stuff, whatever, my motive isn't for them to be like, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should never do this again. But it's like, there's so much glory in both ways. 'Cause, to people that have went to Metro, it's like, or a certain church that you're talking about, it's like, man, they get to hear somebody else's side. And I just pray to God, they get to have like an inside scoop on what other people are feeling and say, oh man, like maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe we should change. I pray that there's that humility. I pray that there is that repentance, like acknowledgement, all those good things. So I would say that is a loving thing to do. And it is loving for the other people too that have been hurt by these certain churches where it's like, I hope that they realize that like their hurt is not invalidated, that what they went through is hurtful and it is also real, but there is a Savior named Jesus who is still longing to be with you. And yeah, man, I don't know. I think there's just so many great things that come along with that.
Right. No, absolutely. And, could I just share like a side note on top of all this?
Sure.
So there is a verse that kind of hit me. And yeah, I don't read my Bible as much as I should, but
Same. Yeah.
him and I are talking about it. We'll figure it out. But and it was just, part of that grassroots where I'm just trying to get back to the basics.
Yeah.
Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest.
Yeah.
And controversial, but for the context, I'm using it. The Message translation. There's a section I cut out because it just hit me so hard. We need to learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And I was like thinking, I don't know why it stuck out to me for a while. And it hit me. Yeah, rhythm. I mean, grace isn't forced.
Yeah.
Grace is grace. It's just a state of being. And so many of us are so weary and burdened and tired in these churches or wherever we are in faith. And we are forcing ourselves to go along. Kind of like when I was preaching, I was just, it had to be done. So I'm just doing it. So there was no grace, no grace for myself, no grace for others. And it was just such a reminder for me. It's like, yeah, we need to learn. We need to remember that grace is not something you force. It's something you live in. And so, yeah, it's just something that stuck out to me. And
yeah,
hopefully it's something we can get closer to.
Dude, that's amazing. I love that so much. If you don't mind, I'd like to backtrack a little bit when you went off on the first thing, because I had a few questions.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is you talked about it in your podcast as well, of how you pretty much had these friends and you stood up for yourself and then nothing, not a word. And I think that was definitely a hurtful thing when I remember when I left Metro too. And I totally understand that I didn't leave on the best terms at all. And I could have handled it in such a better way, And I think one thing though that really hurt was I felt like there wasn't a single person that reached out and was like, hey man, I noticed you're not coming anymore. Is everything all right? What happened, And there was a time where I had a friend leave the church that I went to at one point, and I remember reaching out to them and just seeing what that did for that person. It helped me realize, not to pat myself on the back, but that is one of the most important phone calls I think you could ever make, is calling someone when they leave a church and just saying hey, I just wanted to see how you're doing. Is everything all right? Dude, I think it is just so intentional. It is just really going against the grain. And because there's a lot of churches that are well, if they don't want to be a part of us, then they can leave and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know, it just seems like such a cocky thing to say, you know? So, oh man, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but yeah, so that was kind of the end, when you stood up for your wife, correct? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And I do got to say, I have to shout this guy out because I love him to death. He's my brother, in the middle of all that silence of no one being there, Devin Mara, okay?
All right, yeah.
My
Devin
boy.
Mara's my boy too, yeah.
Yes.
I haven't seen him in a second.
Love that guy.
Yeah.
He made that phone call.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, actually, no. He showed up at my house.
Dude, let's go.
And he
freaking
just...
shout out to Devin Mara, man.
He just went to get me.
Yeah.
And I was just moping there. I'm like, everyone hates me, bro. Blah, 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 blah. And he goes all right, let's get out. Let's go. And I don't even remember what we did, but I just remember I was he kept me going through a really rough spot when I thought I was just all alone. And I mean, I know there's a handful of other people, but he just comes to mind where he was that person. And
yeah,
I gotta say, he was Jesus to me. He did what Jesus would do. He went out and found the lost sheep.
Wow, dude.
I mean, I was drowning, surrounded by bags of Doritos and Cheetos and whatever, and just watching The Office, and I'm like, everyone hates me. And he got me. So no, I'm telling you, even if it's just to go out and just talk or whatever, that, I have no idea to this day how big of an impact that did, but that kept me going.
Dude, let's freaking go, man. That is the type of love we love to see, man. That is awesome. And I think the other question that I had, because you brought up your dad again, kind of throughout that. So if you don't mind me asking, and please tell me no if any point you don't want to talk about this stuff. Like, where does your relationship lie with him now? And like, where does like your mom's relationship lie with him? Like, what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm pretty much an open book to the right people.
Yeah.
So it got to a point that I had to set some really clear boundaries, and so did my mom. I mean, my mom had to get a restraining order on him a few times.
Oh, wow. Are they still married then,
No,
or?
they divorced when I was like 12.
Oh.
So
Okay.
it's just,
Gotcha.
you
Yeah.
know, court and
For sure.
having kids makes things
Yeah,
complicated.
for sure.
But yeah, no, it got to a point, yeah, she had to get a restraining order a few times, and they do not really communicate in any way if we can keep it that way. I have only run into him a handful of times over the last, I don't know how many years. It only has to do if I'm picking up one of my siblings or whatever. Just because my wife and I have sat down, I've gone through therapy, and it is healthier for me to have him out of my life because I know he's just, I don't want to condemn him.
Yeah.
But I know who he is, and he's not someone that's going to change.
For sure.
And it's just healthier for me to be separate, for my daughters to be separate, and my wife to be separate. And I mean, he still has a relationship with my siblings, and it's interesting because my siblings are growing up, and now, I mean, one's at a high school, the other one's a junior. And so like, they helped me release my podcast, and it's, you know, it was kind of awkward for a moment because they're like, so you and dad? I'm like, yeah, because there's like a 10-year gap between us.
Yeah.
But you know, I just told him like, look, he's all of our dad, but my story is not your story. If you have a good relationship with him, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I just want you to be happy. I want you to have that father figure
For sure.
that I didn't have. And I mean, you know, my mom got married a few years ago to an amazing guy, and I gotta say, like, he is, I try not to get emotional. He is my dad. Like, I'm telling you, he is the grace and the love that was always missing.
Yeah.
And I never say this to his face because he'll make fun of me for it. So when he listens to this later, Diego, I'm not crying because of you. I'm crying because of, I don't know.
The lights are too bright.
Yeah, the lights are too bright. The gas is too high.
Yeah.
But no, so yeah, I am not close to my father, and that's not really changing anytime soon.
Yeah.
But once again, with my siblings, if that works for them, I'm more than happy for them.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, I feel like everyone's entitled to that joy and happiness.
Absolutely.
And that's what kind of goes back to like Metro and other churches. Like, just because I had a bad experience doesn't mean you're going to have that bad experience, you know? Like, you may have the most amazing experience ever. And if that's so, that's amazing. And I'm so happy for you. That's just not me.
Yep.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's kind of where I am with my dad, is not.
Yeah. And like, does he, like, how did he respond when you were kind of setting up these boundaries? Like, do you feel like he like kind of like fight to like be closer? Or do you feel like he looked at you like, oh, well, you're the problem, I'm like, you know, fine? Or
Yeah. So at first he responded very physically.
oh man.
Yeah, it was not fun times.
Yeah.
But over time, I just did little things to gain my independence from him. And it just, I would like to say eventually he gave up, which is really interesting because he is one of the most dedicated people when he wants something.
Yeah.
And it just got to a point where he gave up, and he's like, he's not gonna, like me, like, I am not gonna change. I'm not gonna submit myself to his, you know, his commands or whatever. And I remember one of the verses used on me was like, you know, a son shall honor his father and this and that.
Yep.
The funny thing is the flip side of that verse is also like, fathers, don't like instigate your children to want to disobey you or something like that.
Yeah.
That's never brought up. But
yeah. Funny how we miss out on that verse.
I know.
Or that part of the verse.
Right. And, you know, I'm not saying like, all right, if you're a son, go fight your dad.
Yeah.
But no, it's just what's healthier for me and my family. And my dad just continued trying to gaslight me, manipulate me, put me in physical danger to the end. And it was just like, he's not changing.
Yeah.
For me at least. And that's why I've made my my decision final, because my daughters deserve the best. Our kids
Yeah.
deserve a future with freedom and lack of fear and anxiety, like, and there's so much I didn't get in my childhood they're going to get. And I don't have 99% of the answers, but I'm going to go find it because they're worth it.
Wow.
And I mean, I just feel like as a father, like a lot of us can get that. And, you know, if you ever have a kid, or actually, no, you have a cat. So that's pretty much a kid.
Yeah.
You know, you
pretty
would
much.
do anything for your cat. Poe, right?
Yeah. Poe. Yeah.
What would you not do for Poe? Like, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So it's just, that's where I'm at with him. And that's why I made my decision. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because you as a Christian, we don't want to give up.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's what we have to do for our sanity and health.
Yeah, absolutely. Dude, I love that we're talking about this right now. Like, there's almost like points in my head that I like hope that get brought up. And I feel like this is like kind of one of them, like unconsciously knowing it. But it's funny because this podcast is still shot, at my dad's house, because this is where all my equipment is still, since I just live in a small apartment. But as I was setting up today, I told my dad, I was like, oh yeah, my friend Ernesto is coming over. We're shooting a podcast. Hey, you should actually listen to his podcast. It's really good. Because I just wanted to, have him hear your heart and stuff. So he listened to it. And then I came down, or I talked to him a little bit afterwards, and I was like, hey, what'd you think? And he was like, yeah, no, I thought it was good. I think it's hard hearing him say that, though, like about his father, because the Bible tells us to honor our mother and father. And I was like, and I always find it very interesting when people talk about that. And I'm like, well, let's talk about like what honoring looks like. Like, honoring doesn't mean that you have to have a incredibly close relationship and let them disrupt your boundaries or your peace of mind or abuse you or, whatever it is. Like, that's not like honoring somebody at all. So I think of and I think you're living it out perfectly, the verse that talks about, protect your heart at all costs, for it is the wellspring of life.
Right.
I'm big on boundaries as well. And I believe you are literally doing that and protecting your family over everything, which is amazing. And I really, I really applaud you for that. And I think one of my favorite people in the world, Chad Doring,
Yes. Oh, God.
yeah, I can't wait to have him on here. I love his perspective on it. So he has like a bad relationship with his father too. And he talks about protecting his kids from it. And he says, the way I look at my dad is like looking at a scorpion. Is like, I get my daughters and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at the scorpion. It's so beautiful. Like let's look at it from afar and just look at how beautiful of a scorpion it is. So he's honoring the scorpion, but he says, never once though am I going to pick up the scorpion, hand it to my kids, because it's going to hurt them, it's going to sting their hand. So I'm like, dang, bro, like that's what I'm talking about. Like, protect your heart at all costs, for it is the wellspring of life. And obviously honor your mother and father too, but I think there's different ways of honoring them than just always speaking so highly of them, or, and again, not to say negative things about them, but being honest about your past, about your hurt, and saying like, there's no shame or condemnation, but like, this is who they are as humans. And like, I acknowledge it. And yeah, I don't know. I could go on a long tangent, but yeah.
Yeah, no. And I totally understand the difficulty when it comes to, honoring your parents and everything. I mean, because as we all go through our teenage years and like, Mom, Dad, I hate you. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But when it comes to your safety, and when it comes to more severe issues like that, there is no honor in being quiet about your abuse
Mm.
or about your trauma.
Yeah.
And it just so happened in my situation that, when I talk about it in my podcast, although I was bilingual, I still had no voice in either language because of him.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I just, going through that experience and just talking to others have gone through similar situations, like there's that repeating factor of like, yeah, we stay in these abusive and life-threatening situations because we want to honor them.
Mm.
But I was confronted with this question: would God really want you to stay in a position of torment,
Mm.
of abuse? No, God's
Mm.
not gonna. God is a God of freedom,
Mm. Yeah.
and so yeah. I mean, am I honoring my father? No, but I'm not dishonoring him either. I'm not
Mm.
bashing him. I am just stating
Yeah.
the facts that I know my life to be.
Yeah.
Like, there's been this far off distant dream I've always had that I wish that he would actually get better.
Mm.
For years and years I fought for a chance at having a relationship with him.
Mm.
But once I had my daughters, that was it.
Yeah.
Because, okay, it's not about me anymore.
Mm.
It's about them.
Yep.
And I can't take any chances.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's just, I am now honoring my daughters and
Yeah.
my wife
Absolutely.
and keeping my respectable boundary with him. I'm not causing any chaos in his life,
Mm.
and he's in his own corner. And
Yeah.
that is how I honor him, is by keeping distance.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, man. And that's a hard thing to do, man. And like something that I always say to my wife, because I know that it's probably going to cause some type of disturbance eventually in our lives with people that are close around her. But I always encourage her, like, hey, like, somebody said that, and that's not right. Like, I think you should create a boundary there. And I know that person might be like, oh, well, it's because of Alec that she doesn't talk to me anymore or whatever. But the thing is, and I'm not telling her to not talk to anybody, but the thing is like, if I was disrespecting my wife or doing something to her that was not honoring God, I would hope, man, I pray that somebody speaks up when I'm doing it. I hope somebody would say, hey, Alec is doing that, and that is not okay. I would hope that she would make a boundary with me too and say, hey, listen, like, I love you, but like, I'm not doing this or that, or, whatever it is, until you treat me better or you do this. I would hope the same thing. So it's like, live by the sword, die by the sword. Like, I'm not saying this only for my own good or because of like my selfish motives or anything by any means. It's like, no, bro, like if I'm preaching this stuff, like I hope somebody does the same when it comes to me as well.
Absolutely. And just the way I look at boundaries, it's, we have such a small time on earth. And even then, we're not promised 70, 90 years or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to grow. We're here to learn and live life and just keep advancing, keep moving forward. And, like, this is going to sound silly, but like I was at Myers the other day looking at strawberries because my daughter loves strawberries. And I was looking at these strawberries. I'm like, ooh, like these organic strawberries are really nice, but they're kind of expensive. I don't want to invest that into these strawberries. Me being cheap, me.
Yeah.
And
Same.
I go over to the regular strawberries,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just caked with mold in this one area. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it kind of hit me like, it's kind of same with boundaries. If you surround yourself with mold, if you surround yourself with people that bring you down, that sap your energy, that don't push you to grow, you're going to find yourself in the exact same spot they are.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like the organic strawberries, it's expensive. You need to invest in yourself. You need to surround yourself with people that may challenge you, inspire you to grow, or they're just way ahead of the game than where you are.
Yeah.
But you'll be in a better spot, and, that's not to diminish anyone that's struggling, but it's just, there's haters in life, and we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
surround yourself with what makes you grow.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really encourage people to just look at the context of all these scriptures that a lot of these churches throw out, and to test everything. I think that's one of the most underrated verses of all time. I think it's somewhere in Timothy, but it says like test everything, like question everything. And that's something that churches don't really encourage, because it's like, no, we want you to listen to us, listen to what we're saying, and do everything, that we want you to do type thing. But it's like, no, man, like, dude, test everything. So like, yeah, if like you hear a pastor or you hear a parent or a Christian or whoever like say something like this, like, man, don't just like take that, like, go to scripture, pray about it, look at the context, like see what God's saying about it, man. So yeah, I can't imagine what people's lives would be like if they really, really did that with everything.
Absolutely. And to build off what you were saying, once again, I wish I remembered the verse.
Yeah.
Maybe it's somewhere in First John. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But it was something along the lines of like, if what you do is not based in love, then it's worthless.
Yeah.
And,
Amen. Yeah.
And it just kind of makes me think, with the observations I've made and plenty of others have made, more and more in our daily churches, love is a tool as a means to an end.
Yeah.
So when someone comes into the church, you see a lot of situations where they're loved on, the love bombing begins, and they're just immersed in it, and it's amazing, but it's used as a means to get them to change or become someone that fits into that church or becomes a part of the congregation. And I feel like a lot of us have forgotten that love is not a tool. Love is love. We don't love people just for the sake of loving them and expecting nothing in return. And so I just feel like, yeah, if so many of us, like us, churches, whoever, if we could just nail that down more often, where it's like, you know what, we're just going to be loving and expect nothing. Because already in life, I mean, there's so many things expected of us. There's so many strings attached to everything, and you got to have your guard up.
Yeah.
Last place you want that is a church. Like, why are they loving me? What are they expecting from me? Like, nope, nothing. We're just happy you're here. If we don't see you, okay. But, we just wanted to love on you. Like, I feel like that would literally solve 90% of the problems.
Which is so funny, because literally the definition of love is doing something for someone without respect or without expecting anything in return. So the second you are expecting something, you're no longer loving them.
Right.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share up until this point?
I guess if there's any takeaway from this episode, it's just that people are imperfect, and especially at church.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that, if you've been betrayed by people, if you've been betrayed by the church, Jesus hasn't betrayed you. Jesus hasn't left you behind.
Yeah.
It's just his people. And I mean, I wish I could just, look at you guys and say, like, I'm so sorry that they did this to you, that we did this to you. But Jesus loves you. And if you don't know what that love is, or you don't know what love is because of people in your life, situations in your life, just know it's a love that keeps going regardless of anything. And that it truly does get better. There is hope. And, yeah, it does get better.
Dude.
We believe in you.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself, dude. Dude, this has been amazing, man. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for being on this podcast, dude. This is, like I said, I knew this was going to be such a powerful day, and the devil did not want this to happen with all the things going wrong and stuff. And yeah, dude, you're amazing. And one thing I love about you, and I think that other people that might be doubting or deconstructing right now, is like, I don't even know if I would consider you to be deconstructing. I feel like, if anything more, that you're just detangling or reconstructing, because you have such a love for Jesus. It is there. It is prevalent. You still believe in scripture. You still, like, it's all there. You are just like, man, I've been taught like so many things that like were just wrong, or like, used against me, and things that were outside of love. And now I'm trying to like retrain my brain or relearn all these things. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I wish and hope that everybody could have that mindset that might be in a deconstructing phase right now, or wherever they are in their faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do appreciate you having me on today. And to all our friends out there that are somewhere in the deconstruction phase, I just truly hope the best for you. And you take care of your mental health, your emotional health, your psychological health, and your spiritual health, however that looks.
Yeah.
Of course, this is a place of non-judgment. We're just two guys trying to figure things out.
Two guys without the cure, and
Absolutely.
just trying to spread the love of Jesus a little bit.
Absolutely. One episode at a time.
Yeah, dude. Well, heck yeah, man. Well, dude, thank you so much again. And yeah, thank you everybody for listening. And go check out the I Am Not podcast right now.
Bye.
Dude, let's freaking go. Thank you everybody again for watching this episode of The Road to Reconstruction. Something that I said to Ernesto even in the podcast is, I said, I feel like you're not even truly deconstructing. I feel like you're not taking everything and burning it down and throwing it away, but instead, Ernesto truly is reconstructing, I believe, where he's detangling all the things in his heart that he's been taught or experienced growing up that is not healthy for him. I truly believe that Ernesto is detangling all the unhealthy habits or the lies that he's been taught growing up, and he's doing it to honor God now. I know that his number one priority is the health for him and his family, and I commend Ernesto, and I am so proud of him. Thank you again for listening, and until next time, The Road to Reconstruction. Thank you, everybody.